takes the spot. The whole world knows he's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot. Now shy, he's not. He gives it all he's got. He's the Prince of Pot. The Queen of Soul and the Duke of Earl, Elvis Presley and his Jungle Girls, the King of Swing and all whatnot. The whole world knows he's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot. Now shy, he's not. He gives it all he's got. He's the Prince of Pot. Marc Emery.
I'm at 33 stories in downtown Vancouver overlooking English Bay, the Pacific Ocean. And I'm in the midst of a lot of things. 13 months later, after getting out of a 5-year sentence in U.S. federal prisons, I was in 6 states in the United States, and I saw various kinds of prisons. So I come back humbled and ambitious to make some change. And we've got lots going on here in Vancouver, Casper, and I thought I would take this first show to tell everyone what I've been doing and what's going on here in Canada and Vancouver and how I see things from here.
Well, you know, Mark, you've had quite a journey, and so many people have followed you and kept up with you, but they haven't been able to benefit really from hearing all the growth that you have done as a person and all the ways that you are taking your past experience now and using them as a way of making the end of Prohibition more expeditious.
Well, when I was in prison, I was in 6 different kinds of prisons. I was in a maximum security prison in Seattle, SeaTac, for 6 months, and you couldn't even see the outside there, let alone go outside. You never do go outside. And then I was sent to the hub in Oklahoma and a great big warehouse holdover station in Nevada where hundreds of us were in one big long room waiting to get sent to another prison. And then I was in an immigrant prison run by a private prison company, Geo Group in southeast Georgia, and I was with 2,500 Hispanic people from Mexico, Latin America, and maybe 150 from the Caribbean, and 15 people from Canada. And I was quite occupied there with helping inmates in all sorts of different ways. And then I finally spent 3 years in Mississippi at Yazoo City Federal Prison, and then I spent 7 weeks in Louisiana in a county jail waiting to be deported back to Canada. So the experience for me was very beneficial. It was humbling. I can't actually say, even though, I got MRSA in prison and there were sad or unhappy times, but I can't really remember those now. I tend to have a very sentimental view of it, and I tend to regard the time I use reading books and playing in a rock and roll band and learning bass guitar and thinking about things. I had such quality thinking time. I wrote wonderful blogs that I got much feedback. 7,500 letters were sent to me, including one person, I don't include in that statistic, wrote me a letter every day in 4.5 years, and some fabulous material he included in it. So my experience tended to make me feel good about the movement, good about people, good about the prisons. One thing that's happened to me is I can see every point of view from things now. Every time I hear any issue, I understand all points of view. And that has an odd effect on me, meaning I get it when I hear anybody talking. Well, I understand the point of view of the inmates. I understood the point of view of the guards and listened with them in quite some sympathy. And the warden, I always understood what the warden was trying to do and his motivation. And so when I'm out here in the world and I'm listening to all these different political points of view, I get it that people have these wide and varied interpretations of their own reality, of the truth, of politics, of how things are. And so I think that's really helped. I get people's point of view. And it doesn't mean I can support them all, but I understand where they're coming from, and it makes it easier to navigate and communicate with people and understand that maybe what they want out of a situation isn't the same as I want. So once again, the way to find commonality is trying to figure out what they want, where they're coming from, and see if we can put those two things together. My needs and your needs, our wants, your wants, and see if we can come to a commonality there that gets everybody happy. And, prison probably helped me out insofar as I think negotiating those kind of differences between people.
So I also assume that you are now also a larger proponent for prison reform than you were before, even though you were a staunch advocate for prison reform before going in. I'm sure having to be part of what is referred to now as the new slavery system, where corporate prisons
actually,
are.
I'm going to surprise you there. I probably am less interested in prison reform now than I was then.
Wow.
But I'm way more interested in sentencing reform. I mean, in other words, we need to stop sentencing people to jail for a wide variety of so-called crime. Marijuana crime, gun crimes, people who are in possession of a gun spending years and years in jail because they're a felon. And, there's a lot of sentencing reform we need to do. In other words, we need to stop sentencing people to jail for so many crimes. But the prison systems themselves, I was surprised how impressed I was by how civilized they were run by a combination of inmates, of the warden, and of the guards. Again, I've now come to see every point of view. You know what? I read in the papers and people think solitary confinement's a cruel thing, and it can be. But it's absolutely necessary to keep the order in a prison that the really bad people or disruptive elements or destructive elements know that they will be isolated if they continue to behave in an antisocial way. That protects the vast majority of inmates who are not going to spend time in solitary. And I spent 2 times in solitary, one for 8 days and one for 21 days, and they were both unjustified. But they weren't the kind of thing that should really hurt you. Just being by yourself, it's difficult, it's challenging, it's unusual, but, it's not like for years. Right? It's not months and years. It's weeks, days, and weeks, and that sort of thing. So, you know what? I thought the American prison system was surprisingly reasonable, considering how bad it could be. For example, there was no sexual predation going on in any of the federal prisons I saw. And it's because the inmates have organized a very effective mutual protection society for themselves. And that is when someone arrives at a prison, even if they're vulnerable, even if they're homosexual, even if they're effeminate, even if they're mentally challenged, as soon as they get there and you go to your unit that you're assigned to, the first person who says hello to you, after saying his name, will say, "Where are you from?" And you'll say, "Oh, I'm from Georgia." And that person, if it were me, I would say, "Oh, so-and-so over there is from Georgia. Here, I'll go introduce you to him." And you take him to that Georgia guy. Now, if he's a white guy from Georgia, you introduce him to a white guy from Georgia in your unit. Or if he's a black guy from Georgia, you introduce him to a black guy. But once he meets someone from his own state, he's going to meet them all. And they're going to explain to him, "Hey, you're with us. You eat with us and you hang with us, and if anything ever happens to you, you tell us and we will make sure it never happens again or doesn't happen." So everybody's got friends whenever they get to a prison. You've got all the people from your state and your race essentially in your corner. So if you have anyone giving you a hard time, you tell them and it gets settled. And I found that was probably the most natural but also smartest thing I saw about a prison. Because in our prison in Mississippi for 3 years, we rarely got locked down because people understood how it worked. If I got into a fight with you, everybody from my group would come and defend me, and everybody from your group would come and defend you, which would be kind of a potentially icky mess of violence and inevitably a lockdown. So it prevented people from being stupid. In fact, I would have to tell you that prison is probably the most polite place on earth that I have ever been.
Wow.
Some big, huge guy bumped into me, he would apologize immediately. And it didn't matter what his power or status would be. Everybody, if you bumped into someone or just nudged them or even kind of said something, you would be tempted to apologize to make sure there was absolutely no misunderstanding and that you weren't looking for trouble. Because in prisons, one of the most dangerous things you can do is appear to, quote, disrespect someone else. So it tends to be a very polite society. And I understood how inmates doing that at first, because when they said, "Who are you going to be with?" they said to me, because I was the only Canadian in Mississippi. I said, "Well, do I have to be in any group?" And they said, "Yeah, you do. Because if someone preys on you or picks on you, you're going to need backup, and you get to choose who that is." So I ended up hanging out with a lot of guys from Alabama, and I had many friends from many states in every prison I was in, so I was never really at any risk. But I tended to hang around with my friend Daniel and his friends from Alabama. If I needed someone for backup, they were available. And consequently, I made myself, even though I wasn't from Alabama, I would make myself useful to them in getting books and being helpful and getting information from the outside and this sort of thing, in kind of like my polite way to acknowledge that should I need somebody, there were a lot of guys from Alabama that would do whatever it takes to make sure I was never threatened or safe and this sort of thing. So I thought that was a very wise system because if someone was sexually preying on a younger inmate who might be younger or effeminate, I saw a person who was a flaming homosexual. He called himself a faggot. He came in and said, "Mark, I'm a faggot." He was very gay, outwardly gay, and he didn't hide it. He didn't have any particular interest in hiding it. That's who he was, and he was going to be who he was in prison. Now, a lot of guys won't have anything to do with homosexuals. They won't hurt them or beat them or harm them, but they won't talk to them. They won't hang with them. But when that fellow got there, he was white, and he was from Alabama, and they took him on like they took anybody else, and he ate with them, and he was protected by them, and he got them into trouble, so they had to come to his aid a number of times. But the rules still applied. There was no break in the link just because you were an unusual person. And I thought that was interesting, too, that they would defend him and protect him despite his clearly alternate lifestyle choice and behavior that reflected that lifestyle choice. It didn't matter. They still protected him, and he was still counted as any one of the other group. And so I never saw in nearly 5 years anyone get sexually preyed upon, or for that matter, getting preyed upon at all in any way, whether for money or something, because there was always people to back you up who just would not permit that to happen.
Well, that is really unusual to hear, because most people probably imagine that, you're pretty much on your own when you're in there and backed into a corner, and it's pretty much of a terrifying situation. And so to hear someone speak about how it's polite and courteous, and they go out of the way to avoid fights and avoid complications, it's interesting.
And you're allowed to be on your own there, just because you've got a group that's willing to be with you. They call it riding in a car, which is like you're together with this group. But they also gave you your space. Prison's all about giving each other space because they know you can drive each other nuts at close range.
I bet.
And if you're trapped in a cell and you're not getting along, and I hear guys have fights all the time, you could get real boiled up in a close range in a prison. If you've had a bad day, it would be easy to take a punch at a guy. So, a lot of things in prison were designed for people to let off steam and not end up like that, because you're going to get put in solitary if you start a fight for months on end. And, so losing your temper for just 2 or 3 minutes can cause you months and months of heartache. So, there were a lot of things in prison that were designed to let guys let steam off without getting anybody, including themselves, into trouble. A lot of athletic programs, a lot of games to play, a lot of hobbies you could do, leathercraft, learning a musical instrument, art class, exercise. There were organized sports of all kinds. There was people doing lectures, religious classes. There was whatever you needed to do. There were to kill time or to educate yourself, or just so you didn't get frustrated, so you weren't quite alone. There was a lot of that to do. But if you wanted to sit and read a book the whole time and not have to talk to anybody or do anything, then you could do that as well. So it was not only very polite, but it was a good time, if you were really inclined to do so, to do some good, clear thinking. And maybe change your life, or maybe make additions to your life, or maybe make some improvements to your life. You had that opportunity there. And now here's another thing. You were about to talk about the slave labor wages. But you see, I can see all points of view. They paid, my job was unimportant. I got some pittance of, I got like $16 a month, like 50 cents a day. And even that might have been all right for the little work I had to do for it. 15 to 20 minutes a day was real easy. But some guys, most guys, hundreds of guys, wanted a job that went 8 hours. And even if it only paid them 50 cents an hour, that would still be $100 to $150 at the end of the month that they didn't have before, that would be very valuable to them. But what was more important is that job was really valuable. Those guys, their day went by quickly. They had a very communal relationship with all the other guys in the factory. At Yazoo, for example, that factory made U.S. Army uniforms. They sewed. I often say we made U.S. Army, but I didn't work in the factory. But our prison that I was in made belts and flak jackets and uniforms for the U.S. Marine Corps and the U.S. Army. And there were 7 other factories making uniforms and stuff for the U.S. Army as well. And guys waited months and months and months to get those jobs. And those jobs were highly coveted. So people can say, oh, it's terrible what they pay, and that by any objective standard, it would be considered poor. But you know what? Guys really wanted those jobs. They wanted it to take up the time. They wanted it for whatever money that it did pay. Oftentimes it was only between $100 and a top end of $250. But, those guys got to be very frugal and could save that money. And some people, after they worked for several years, got more money, like maybe $300-400 a month after 10 years. So that when they got out of prison, they actually had $5,000 and $8,000 saved up, which would be invaluable to them on the outside. So people say, people shouldn't get 20 cents an hour to $1.50 an hour. But remember, you're not paying rent. You're not paying, utilities bills. You're not paying for your food, although I did. That's a different story because the food is generally not very good. But, so yes, the wages are poor, but guys would wait for months to get those jobs. They couldn't wait to get them. So from the point of view of the inmate, if you ask an inmate, he would say, make more jobs for us. If you could double the size of this factory, that would be good because more of us want to work there. So you won't find inmates complaining about that slave labor system that goes on in prison. I just wanted to point that out, that those guys love those jobs. I couldn't think, the thought of working 8 hours a day making Army uniforms for the U.S. military for like $200 a month seems like hell to me. But I live a privileged life. I had people who loved me, who put money in my account, who made my survival possible, primarily my wife, but certainly good friends Dana Larson, and hundreds of Americans and Canadians that gave me money or gave Jody money on my behalf. I had that kind of support base that other people wouldn't have. So that job to them is very valuable. And I would say most inmates would prefer to have those factories than not prefer to have them.
So you're listening to Cannabis Culture Radio here on the Broadcasting Network. But we're going to take a commercial break. You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. Please share us with your friends.
Hi, I'm Montel Williams. Most of you know me as a talk show host, but I'm also an author, actor, single father of 4, a fitness writer, avid snowboarder, and I'm also a medical marijuana patient. Like many of the million people who are living with multiple sclerosis, I'm in pain every single day. And sometimes my nerves are so raw that if you brushed up against me in an elevator, I'd scream. I can't sleep at night from the pain, and sometimes the spasms in my legs are so intense they will wake me up throughout the night. I've tried the strongest prescription medications available, and I'm going to tell you, they do not work. And in fact, they leave me in a stupor, and most of the time, it's impossible to even live your life. Now, I've tried medical marijuana, and I'm going to tell you something, it works. If you'd like more information about medical marijuana, you can contact the Marijuana Policy Project at mpp.org or call 1-877-JOIN-MPP.
This may sound strange, but I want to pay taxes. See, I don't drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes. I relax with something science has proven is much safer, marijuana. And I want to buy it somewhere that charges taxes to pay for schools and roads, just like alcohol and tobacco. What do you think should profit? Are schools and roads or drug dealers?
Visit the Marijuana Policy Project Foundation at joinmpp.org or call 1-877-JOIN-MPP.
Georgia.
Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
Greg Williams makes Vancouver free. We want to help them with all we got. The whole world knows he's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot. Now shy, he's not. He gives it all he's got. He's the Prince of Pot. We need someone.
Hi, you're listening to Marc Emery here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, a former prisoner of war in the drug war. And actually, I've been to 34 prisons and jails in Canada and the United States in my 25-year crusade to make marijuana legal. And 9 out of 10 provinces and 6 United States I've seen the prisons of. And Let me just tell you, Casper, and our audience, what's going on here in Vancouver and Canada. Enough about the past. The present is exciting, and I'm glad to be here. It's mid-September. We're a month away from a national election in Canada, and we have a very good competition. We have three major opposition parties, the Green Party, the New Democratic Party, and the Liberal Party, and they all want to either decriminalize marijuana or legalize it entirely. And so it'll be exciting to see the composition of the next government just a month from now, should the Conservative government get defeated. And the good news is the Liberal Party and the New Democratic Party are leading in the polls over the Conservative Party by admittedly a small margin, but it looks like we might get a change of government. And at the local level in Vancouver, City Hall, although they're telling people they're basically regulating and taxing dispensaries, is also a kind of a quasi-form of prohibition, and then they're ordering most of them to close first and then giving out select addresses throughout the city to certain people under a certain point system. So we have this convoluted kind of legalization going on at the local level, and they've also got laws now that ban lounges, which Jody and I operate two lounges in the city, Cannabis Culture lounges in our facilities. And we are partnered with a dispensary at one of our locations at 1674 Davie Street in the west end of Vancouver, where our latest shop is. We're partnered with a dispensary that's been ordered to move because we're 280 meters from a public school. And the new law says you can't be within 300 meters of a public school. And it's absurd because the public school is really 3 blocks away. And this dispensary in our Cannabis Culture lounge and store is on a main arterial road, the main road in this entire district. So a lot of people are upset about these new local laws that are affecting 90 dispensaries there are in the city now, at least 90. There may be more, but 90 that I'm aware of. And they're being told that many of them have to close permanently because they're within 300 meters of a community playground, a school, or for that matter, another dispensary. You're not allowed to be within 300 meters of another dispensary. So it's causing a bit of chaos and a bit of concern. And so there are injunctions coming. Lawyers representing various dispensaries are opposing this. And we won't be closing our lounges down, for example. They will have to have a confrontation with us in order to make that happen. But I don't think it will happen. I think over time there'll be so much litigation and so much opposition by these dispensaries in a period of time when we may have a government that wants to legalize marijuana a month from now anyway, that we're going to see a very dynamic and fluid series of changes going on in Canada. So we're going to see a lot of people opening dispensaries throughout the country and opening lounges and getting raided and arrested. We've certainly had probably more police activity throughout Canada in the last 6 months than we've had in the last 5 years.
Wow.
As that a lot of these dispensaries are being raided outside of Vancouver and Victoria and Nanaimo. I can think of places in Parksville that have been raided, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Ontario, who only in the last 2 or 3 months have been raided. Winnipeg is another one that comes to mind. I may have already said that, but the thing is, what we're seeing is we've got a federal election where we could have parties that advocate legalization coming to power. We have Vancouver City Hall trying to regulate, whether regulate them out of business or into business is a call to question. But now we've got quite a fight on our hands. And it's nice to be in Vancouver, which for this part of the world at this particular moment in time, it's a very fortuitous time to be here. In the next 2 months, everything could change. If we get a new government in the federal election, if Vancouver City Hall successfully or unsuccessfully regulates these businesses, it's going to change the way Canadians are looking at how they're buying marijuana, how they're getting marijuana, the price of marijuana, and the kind of legal regime we're going to see. Because Vancouver is as affected by federal law, you'd think, as any other community in Canada. But the reality is that people here don't get charged for selling. They don't get charged for possessing. There's a lot of economic activity involving cannabis and extracts going on here. For example, Vancouver is really one of the few places in Canada where you can get a smorgasbord of extracts, butters, waxes, resins, rosins, shatters. You go to a place like Eden Dispensary, which is partnered with Cannabis Culture on Davie Street, and I walk into that place, and they have like 50 kinds of marijuana. They have 70 different kinds of shatter, wax, butter, resin, rosin.
Wow.
All these different extracts available, canna caps, CBD caps, THC caps, Phoenix tears, Charlotte's Web.
Wow.
I mean, it's just beautiful and amazing and marvelous that they can have all this, and that's just one of 90 locations, right? So when you see that for the first time, you realize, oh my God, this is what it'd be like if it was legal. Or rather, if it is legal in Vancouver, this is what it's like. And it's really exciting. And when people come here for the first time and they get access, they become members and they see that, it's just that there's no going back for them. I mean, that is such an obvious reality of the way it should be. This is how it should be. That's the first thing you think. This is how it should be. Jars of all these different kinds of strains, reasonably priced, accessible now without any further bureaucracy or paperwork or anything like that. You pay your taxes and you walk out with like 4 or 5 different kinds, whatever it is you want. And then you walk downstairs into our store and buy the pen that you need to enjoy those, shatters or waxes or vaporizers. And we've lounges where you can, hang out with others or medicate if it's medical, get high if it's not medical, and have entertainment and have a special place to go. So when you come to Vancouver and you sit in just our facility alone, almost everybody sits back, breathes a sigh of relief and says, this is how it should be. This is what it would be like if it were legal, right? So in Vancouver, it is if you come and visit Vancouver, once you have marijuana, you'll feel that sense of legal. You'll feel that you're safe carrying it around, that you could smoke it probably almost anywhere and not be interfered with or criticized or looked at upon oddly. And it's a wonderful, liberating feeling. But you know what? Right now, we have no guarantee that it'll stay that way. The federal government is threatening to send the federal police in to supersede the local law, to supersede local police, and actually raid these dispensaries directly. It would be like calling in the DEA, which would happen all the time in the United States. But in Canada, police have a jurisdiction that's not to be interfered with. So we have the Vancouver Police Department here, and anything the federal police want, they're supposed to ask the local police, and then they would execute that because it's their jurisdiction. But because the local police here are not taking orders from the federal government, and they're not arresting people, in fact, all drugs are decriminalized in Vancouver. For example, you can get methamphetamine and go to a safe injection site and consume that methamphetamine as you could crack cocaine or heroin or morphine.
Wow.
They don't arrest people here for possession of any kind of drug.
Wow.
Nor will you see arrests at any level whatsoever for selling those kind of drugs. Right? So the fact is, though, that marijuana gets all the publicity. And it's getting all the publicity because it's the one illegal drug that is used by a huge section of society. And it's probably the only illegal drug where the major concern is not its potential lethality. In other words, if you've got a morphine problem or a heroin problem or an oxycodone problem or meth, this kind of problem, it's because you're worried that there's going to be fatality, that there's going to be health impacts, right? Where we don't have that with marijuana. No one is under the misapprehension that pot is going to kill you, or that pot's dangerous to society at large, or that it's criminogenic. So most people in Canada, and 70% of the people in British Columbia, my province, support legalization. And it's a huge number of people. So we've got this situation where the public is convinced. It's happening on the ground, and now we're in the midst of a federal election where marijuana has definitely become an election issue, and that 3 parties are promoting their marijuana policies. The NDP has said they would decriminalize marijuana as soon as they form the government. The Liberals have said that's not even good enough. We'll legalize it from sale and production to retail from beginning to end if we form the government. And the Green Party says we'll legalize it and use that money to finance post-secondary education across the country. So these are momentous times, but people are still getting busted, and people are still being arrested throughout all of Canada. And I would probably say that there'll be more arrests for marijuana this year than any previous year ever, because the police are heightened towards it. People are trying to open dispensaries. People are buying it. People want to join. People want to shop at a dispensary. So, they feel they should have the right to go and choose marijuana in a safe and exciting environment where there's this incredible selection, where you buy it in a civilized environment, under lights, indoors, where people are paying taxes. And it's an idea that's cascading across the West Coast, because as Oregon officially makes its legalization law later on this month, people are going to have that expectation that they should, and like they do in Washington now. Sure, it costs a fair bit in Washington to buy legal pot, but everybody will tell you it feels great to do that. It feels great to go in and pay your taxes, to get your weed, to walk out of there. And people all say, this is really good pot. It's expensive, but it's good. And as more states legalize it, I'm hoping in California next year, then we're going to see the price drop. and more aspects of the prohibition are going to fade away.
Well, not only does it feel good, it almost feels like you're on a Hollywood set and you're waiting for somebody to yell, "Cut! Take the buds back to the prop room. All right, that's a wrap." You know?
Have you ever noticed, though, how all those shows use fake weed? I always find that funny. Now, I know it's because in Canada, the Trailer Park Boys, have a show, and 9 seasons. You can watch this on Netflix. And Jodie did a cameo appearance in their most recent movie called "Don't Legalize It." She's in that film. And I've done a sketch with them in the past, too. And yet those guys never use real plants when they're talking about marijuana. And it's always that kind of odd unreality.
Exactly.
And weeds didn't have real plants either. They used fake ones. In the first season, they were really bad fake ones, and then they got to be better. But, you rarely ever see real pot used in any of these representations about pot. So we'll know when it's legal because people will use real pot in the movies.
Exactly. Now, one thing that's also surprised me the most about the Canadian business community is I understand that the Canadian government helps subsidize the advertising for the hemp industry up in Canada. There's a huge hemp industry making cosmetics and foods and clothing and oils and all kinds of awesome products. You would think that the presidents of those corporations, the employees, the CEOs, even their family members would be out in drove, jumping up and down, saying, "End this stupid prohibition." But it seems like you can't even get them to even whisper the phrase out loud.
Well, you got to understand that there's a line in Chinatown, the movie with Jack Nicholson, where he tries to make sense of what's going on. And somebody said to him and says, "Jack, we have to all swim in the same dirty water." And what that means is that you have to make compromises in order to survive. So why don't hemp businesses in Canada that are profiting by the growing of hemp seeds that they crush up into oils and make into cornflakes or hemp hearts or foods? It's because they're regulated by the federal government. And the federal government gives them their license. The federal government tells them what strains they can grow. The federal government taxes their land as agricultural land or not, depending on how. And a lot of farmers just believe that getting political doesn't help them. Agriculture is often very political anyway, but when you have to get a special license and a special strain of thing and get approvals, at various levels to grow hemp, you're not likely to want to rock the boat. It probably took you years just to get those licenses, to get that land ready, to get all that stuff. Why would you endanger it? And one of the biggest tragedies about hemp cultivation in Canada is that, you're going to hate this, is that several tons of CBD-rich oil is thrown away. Because when you harvest hemp seeds for the oil, you have to throw away all the other byproducts, including the resin that builds up around the seed bracts, which is rich in CBD. 3 of the strains that are used in Canada have really high CBD contents that could be recovered and could provide an enormous medical boom to this country. But because the current government doesn't acknowledge any benefit to cannabis, they still refuse to change what is really a regulation so that we could have thousands of pounds of CBD-rich oil on the market to serve that medical need. Because like Canada and the United States and the rest of the world, there's a great shortage of CBD right now. The number of people who want to find it for epilepsy, for children, for spasticity disorders, for inflammation, for Crohn's disease, all those things that CBD helps with, including cancer, ameliorating cancer, there's simply not enough CBD around, and the price is very high as a consequence. And here we are in Canada throwing away thousands of pounds of CBD each harvest with hemp. So we need to have that law changed. That's something that 99.9% of the Canadian public isn't even aware of, that we are destroying needlessly some of the most valuable medicine on earth just because of a government regulation.
That's
so
sad.
The battle doesn't stop when people go to vote. It doesn't stop when they finish a protest, because there's so much more that needs to be done, that can be done. I bet, what I should do is, if I had the time and I was really committed, I would get people to send letters to the Minister of Agriculture for him to allow that CBD-rich oil to be used as medicine. It wouldn't require much of a campaign, but somebody's got to do it. And there's an endless number of things that need to be done in order to get marijuana, because as we know, marijuana won't legalize itself.
Well, you've got a new tool now that you're using, and that's the Cannabis Culture Radio Hour here on the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. And it can be used as a tool to help organize that type of activity and very much more.
Well, and there's another thing that we're going to do. We have an election here on October 19th, and our store decided that we would reward anybody who brings a selfie of themselves, taking a picture of themselves at the voting booth. Now, you're not allowed to take a picture in the voting booth, but they don't know actually what you're doing because it's concealed, right?
Right.
So we are offering free lounge admission worth $5 and 2 packs of rollies worth $5 to anybody who shows us the photograph, the selfie of themselves voting that day. Now, you can vote now in the advanced polls at any of these advanced voting districts. So you could show us that tomorrow, and if you show us you voting, then, until we get used to seeing you repeat yourself with that same photograph, you're going to get free lounge admission and 2 packs of rollies free. And I was thinking, boy, if Starbucks gave a free coffee out to everybody that day who showed they voted, and other people in our industry with shops like bong shops and dispensaries, maybe a dispensary could give a free joint out that day if you can prove you voted. We can't give you a joint depending on how you voted, because that's bribery.
Right.
But we can certainly reward all people who can prove they voted. And I think that's something that should become a popular cause célèbre. In other words, businesses offering actual inducements, free coffee, a free cake, a free lunch or something, a free burger, if you show us that you voted today.
Yeah, because we are living in a community that is now so consumer-driven that unless they get a reward that they can have some kind of tangible feeling to, you're right, sometimes they just don't budge.
Well, here's the thing. Our people don't vote. And our people meaning young people, and our people meaning the cannabis culture. Now, there's a lot of reasons to be jaded and cynical and negative about the political process, because it is an imperfect process, and it's a compromised process, and it's full of corruption. But ultimately, we still need to get people out to vote, and we need them to participate in the process. And another thing that annoys me, not only do we not vote, we have to come up with ways to get people to vote. So I figured those of us in the movement that have businesses, we have an obligation to try and use those businesses to get people to get out and vote. So that's what we're going to do at Cannabis Culture, and we're going to tell others and see if other people will do that. Dispensaries, retail stores, coffee shops. Let's get people out to vote. Let's reward them for proving they did vote. And the other thing is, too, and I know we've got a break coming up, but are the people that oppose the initiatives going on. To me, the people who oppose Proposition 19 and 210 and I-502 in Washington in 2012 and who are against the Ohio initiative now for 2016, these people are traitors to the movement, because all of these things are an improvement of what we've got right now. And politics is an imperfect process. It's a corrupt process. You're never going to get a perfect ballot initiative. But all the ballot initiatives that have ever been put forward are better than the status quo.
Fantastic. And on that, we will take a break here on the Cannabis Culture Radio Hour. And when we come back, we're going to pick up where we left off. So make it a point to let your friends know about Marc's new show, because, it's always best when you're sharing it with friends.
You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. Please share us with your friends.
Break, another sign that the boomers are ruling this country. Barack Obama said this week that he's tried drugs and it barely got a mention in the newspapers. But remember the uproar that cost Douglas Ginsburg his Supreme Court nomination over the disclosure that he smoked marijuana. And this from 1992.
When I was in England, I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it, and didn't inhale, and never tried it again.
How did he know he didn't like it if he didn't inhale? I'm sorry, you can't go back to that. But by 2004, Democrats were falling all over each other to admit trying pot.
Which of you are ready to admit to having used marijuana in the past? And they want us to go around and ask each of you. Senator Kerry, yes or no? Yeah. Yes. Okay. Senator Edwards? Yes. Senator Lieberman?
I have a reputation for giving unpopular answers at Democratic debates. I never use marijuana. Sorry.
Which brings us up to this week and Barack Obama.
Look, when I was a kid, I inhaled frequently. That was the point.
So what was that cameraman on?
He was inhaling, apparently.
Howard, what do you think about this?
Well, I think it's an accepted part of the culture now, and I think for one of the reasons why Barack Obama is so popular, especially among younger people, is that he seems so real. He seems to acknowledge the reality of things. It's kind of almost like a dog whistle kind of thing. Older people can't hear it. Younger people hear it. And that's one of the things that they hear. He seems to be willing to be honest, straight from the shoulder.
Is that like Ralph Nader always being for industrial hemp? Okay, that must be a dog whistle because I don't hear it.
There's nothing to say once you said, yes, I inhaled. Then what? Nothing. The thing people can't stand is the lie.
My name is Angel Rach. I'm a mother of 2 teenage children, and I fought all the way to the Supreme Court for the right to use the medicine that saved my life. I've been permanently disabled for 10 years, with an inoperable brain tumor, wasting syndrome, and several other serious conditions. For 4 years, I was in a wheelchair, in so much pain, I couldn't even hug my kids. The hardest part was looking in their eyes and seeing how much they were suffering because of my medical condition. The medicine that gave me my life back and gave my kids their mom back was cannabis, also known as medical marijuana. With medical marijuana, I can walk, maintain my weight, and I can be a mom. Without it, my doctors believe that I would die. To learn more about medical marijuana, contact Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP.
Marc Emery may go down south. He's got a brain and he uses his mouth. A little loud, so he got caught. The whole world knows he's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot.
Hi, you're listening to Marc Emery. This is the Cannabis Culture Hour. Casper, when it comes to presidential politics, there's not a lot to be thankful for in the upcoming slate. Chris Christie hates us, and Hillary Clinton seems benignly inclined to ignore us. And Rand Paul said some great things about, reeling back the drug war, and he's going to be the guy I'm supporting. I mean, if Rand Paul isn't in this election, I don't know what I'm going to recommend my American friends do, because most of the candidates are abusive towards us or benignly inclined to ignore us, as Hillary Clinton is. What do you think Donald Trump's position is on this?
I've tried to figure it out, and it seems flip-flop.
I know. I can't see any. A man with so many opinions seems to have no opinion about pot.
Exactly, and I found like 3 pro and 3 con, and they've all been so ambiguous. I would think ultimately, as a businessman, he would be smart enough to recognize the aspects of ending prohibition and the realities that come with regulating and putting it into a cash crop in an industry and creating jobs with it. I would think that would make sense to him. So I would think ultimately, as a businessman and as somebody who's willing to employ millions of people quickly in this country, he would recognize that as to being a key avenue to make that happen.
I think that's the logic that our people were going to have to use if he becomes a serious candidate or continues to be a serious candidate and becomes the president. Because, when you watch him on The Apprentice, for 7 years that show was on, he's a logical, rational person. When he fires someone, you generally agree that was the weakest link. They were the least productive. He's got a keen eye for what's going on. By the time he did 7 seasons, you're pretty convinced that Donald Trump understands business. He understands making a deal. He understands making things happen, because every episode of The Apprentice is about people making things happen. From the point of the show it starts, he says, here's what we have to get done. Here's what we have to achieve. At the end of this episode, we're going to have somebody who, we got this done, right? And I like that, because one of his criticisms of the administrations of this one and previous ones is that they don't know how to make a deal, right? They can't get things done. Right now, what Donald Trump thinks needs to be done is very definitely open to question, whether it's invading another country or making a deal with another country, right? But clearly, if you watch his show, there's intelligence there. Now, right now, he's appealing to the masses with his inflammatory talk.
Well, one thing I want to inject right here, the only thing that I really see as a true benefit to Donald Trump is he's not owned by anybody. There is no PAC that owns him, no lobby organization, no corporation, unlike all the other politicians. That blows my mind. That's the one thing I love most about him.
Well, he's not even going to be owned by the Republican Party. He can literally be independent of anything they can do because he can certainly outspend them. And he's an egomaniac, and I don't say that disparagingly.
Well,
but
politicians
he's the kind of guy
not.
that would not balk at spending $100 million of his own money. Plus, I'm sure he can raise lots, but he could spend $100 or $200 million, and it wouldn't bother him. That'd be kind of like entertaining for him. It would be like one big advertising billboard for him, which is how any businessman logically thinks about it, right?
Exactly.
So I actually think he's going to be the nominee. And much as I would really only wholeheartedly support Rand Paul, I think Donald Trump is going to be a very interesting character, and we should keep an eye on how we want to present our issue to him. And I think that's something now. It's not so much does Donald Trump have a policy on marijuana, but can we help him in this formative period create a positive marijuana policy?
I think a jobs feasibility program type of document put together, some kind of study given to him, would open his eyes in that aspect, just by seeing the number of jobs that it would create in our country, at home, and everywhere. Because you know that this industrial hemp crop is basically a backyard crop. You grow it in your backyard and you use it in your backyard to create jobs. And so for him to be able to see that, and then it can grow like in a short period of time and start those jobs in a quick period of time, can really get the country moving, not just in America, but around the world.
Well, it's his naturally peculiar anti-Mexican bias. I mean, how he describes his opposition to the current immigration policy, smacks of racism. And I hope he doesn't think that marijuana is kind of a Mexican form of subverting American values or something like that.
No, and I think people misunderstand his immigration policy as being a Mexican policy. He loves the Mexicans. What he's agitated about is the law-breaking aspect of the people who are here. He has no problem that they're Mexicans. He doesn't care about what their race is, just that they're here legally.
Well, here's the thing, though. I mean, we're all breaking the law, too, and we're here. So if Donald Trump is upset about people breaking the law in America, that he loves Mexicans but he hates lawbreakers, well, then he can say he loves Americans but hates lawbreakers, and that would still be bad for us too. In order to make the law respected, you have to make the law respectable. And so, again, that's another business kind of thing. Business people don't obey bad laws. If another way presents itself preferably, right? We try and skirt bad laws. When taxes get too high, we smuggle. We avoid paying taxes. If regulations get too onerous, we ignore them. You have to, if you can. And so business people can only bend so far, and then it becomes unpractical and uncompetitive.
Right.
And I think he understands that. If you want to make the law respected, please make it respectable.
Right, and I think he also knows that you cannot actually afford to round everybody up. That's not economically possible either.
Well, you'd think that, but remember, the federal government's never concerned about spending money because they've been rounding us up for 45 years.
Okay,
right?
never mind.
And how many, 1 million Americans every year get charged? I mean, that's a massive waste of money they haven't learned anything about in 45 years. When people say, I always like that when people say we should change this policy because it's wasteful. Government doesn't care about waste. They get all their money for free anyway. They steal it from us. And so they're not concerned with being wasteful. If they earned it, they would be concerned with being wasteful. But they just steal it from the taxpayer. And so government is always concerned about power and control. Every single law that's ever passed is designed to control people or the affairs of people. There is no law doing anything else. Even a law designating where a road goes determines whose property will be seized, whose tax money will be used, and who shall gain and not gain by the building of this road. So there's politics and corruption in every government decision, and it always offends our basic human individual rights, every law that's ever passed. So government's obsessed with control. Controlling people, controlling people's actions, controlling people's behavior. It doesn't care about money. They get their money or they don't get their money. It doesn't matter to them.
Yeah, I forgot.
Right?
My bad.
Because they just go into debt. They have deficits. Normal people can't go billions of dollars in debt on some bad failed social policy and keep it up. Right? If you and I ran a drug war, it would have ended 44 years ago because we can't afford it. Because we really would have to produce our money, but the government just steals their money and uses it for whatever social control they deem in their interest, right? So people need to understand government doesn't think like a logical entity. Government thinks like a scared, angry mob that has to lash out and punish people as it sees fit and keep them all in line, right? And then in the reverse, buying everybody off they can buy off to keep them on side, right? It's just this endless game going on, right? But that's what politics is, and a lot of reasons our people don't go to vote is because they say, oh, it's all rigged, it's all crooked, it's all compromised, it's all corrupt, and all of that is true. But the reason we go vote and the reason we participate in ballot initiatives and gather signatures and participate politically is as a matter of self-defense. It protects us. If you don't do that, we will get swept aside by the power of government. So we organize in our own mutual interests and our own self-defense, and that's why we participate in politics. We have to acknowledge, yes, it's corrupt. Yes, it's inefficient. Yes, it doesn't work. Yes, it's backward. Young people think, man, voting is so like 1950s compared to the modern technological era. It's all that. But we still have to participate in it because if we don't, our survival is threatened.
Exactly. All of our freedom, you're absolutely right, is taken from us. And it is very important that you do get out and get involved. Now, we are down to like the last 5 minutes of this broadcast. This is your first hour of the Cannabis Culture Radio Show. Let people know how you're going to be sailing this ship.
More sophisticated, too. I'll get slicker. I'll get some guests. I'll bring some structure with me. But it's great that you've got me doing this. I haven't done hardly any interviews for over a year now. I've resisted doing a show on our own Pot TV network, and I encourage our audience to find me at Cannabis Culture, at our websites, on our stores. I'm in my stores in downtown Vancouver every day, Monday to Saturday, and I meet visitors every hour of every day from all over the world, and it's delightful to see them, and I encourage them to come see me in Vancouver and experience our lifestyle here with our 90 dispensaries and our weed stores and our lounges and our beautiful weather and our fabulous West Coast mountains, lakes, oceans, and rivers, and find out where the revolution started. Although I would say it probably started in some place in California authentically, but Vancouver likes to think this is the center of the revolution worldwide. So,
well, you guys have a huge turnout for your rallies. There's a big support in the community. Unlike many parts here in our country, it seems like the Canadians do have a little more chutzpah behind them and a little more courage to come out publicly out of the closet and stand shoulder to shoulder and announce that they want to see end of prohibition.
Well, it's getting a little more serious now. You know, I can tell by the detoxification drinks and chemicals I sell for people who have to do urine tests. You know, 5-10 years ago, it was just guys in the oil and gas industry that needed to be tested, you know, and they come and buy the cleansing so they can pass those tests and continue to smoke pot.
Right.
But now it's guys in mining, guys in trucking, guys in chemicals, guys in industrial, guys who work in the forest, guys in oil and gas, and fishing. Everybody seems to be getting tested in Canada nowadays. So, on one hand, yes, it's getting more likely to be legal soon, but the stigma is still very large and growing amongst employers who are like blackballing people who are seeking work or blackballing people who are smoking in their own time around their work schedule. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we've still got so many things to try and achieve even if we get it legal. Right. As we see for example, in Vancouver, it's quite possible. I know we've got to close it up. But your landlord can evict you if the smell of pot smoke is in your apartment. You can get a fine if you smoke down at the beach or on the street. They're trying to close all the lounges up, like my place. So it's quite possible that though you would not get criminally charged in Vancouver, there might not be any safe place for you to nonetheless smoke marijuana because your landlord might evict you. The city might give you a smoking at the beach or on the street fine. Wow. Or I might be prohibited from offering you space in my lounges. So so many battles to go. And we're still looking for an endless number of soldiers who want to come in and commit to some action that's not on social media. You know, right. I almost feel like we should have a button that says it doesn't count if you did it online.
Exactly. So many people figured it because they shared it on Facebook, they did it. I'm done for the day.
That's about as much use sometimes as sharing your sandwich on Instagram. You didn't cure world hunger by showing people what you had for lunch. So don't,
Exactly. All right, Mark. We got down to one last minute. Give him a shout out again for your fantastic website.
cannabisculture.com, and we do a lot of video ourselves, shows, pot.tv. You know, that TV stands for Tuvalu, you know. We have to pay them, I think, $500 every year for that .tv one, and along with postage stamps, that's how the entire budget of the government of Tuvalu, which is an island in the Pacific, survives, by selling that .tv extension on the web and their little postage stamps and the occasional tourist that finds their way out into the middle of the Pacific.
I had no clue because I own a .tv domain to it, and so at least it's nice to know that I'm supporting a little country. Well, that's great.
There you go.
Well, this is going to be every week now on high noon Eastern Standard Time, that broadcasted at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. On Fridays, every Friday here in the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. It gets posted up into the archives, of course, on Tumblr, SoundCloud, iTunes, iHeart, and all the other outlets that you can find MP3s. And this is also, you can download it from the timeforhemp.com website archives, and you can share it with your friends. As Mark builds a archive of programming, they will all be there, so you can share every show and tune in. If you've missed one, you can also download it and listen to it when it's convenient for you and all your smart devices.
And a final shout out to Bill Small of the Tall Brothers for their wonderful song Prince of Pot, which we're probably not paying them any royalties to use every week.
We're not, but you're right. They love you, and I know that they consider it to be an honor to have this to be your theme song. They've been on the network before, and they've talked about how wonderful it is to be part of your life.
And used in the movie Prince of Pot, which you can see online, the national TV movie that was made about me in 2006.
Yeah, absolutely. So tune in next week and come back and see Marc Emery on Cannabis Culture Radio here on the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network.
Marc Emery may go down south. He's got a brain and he uses his mouth. A little loud, so he got caught. The whole world knows he's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot. Now shy he's not, he gives it all he's got. He's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot. I'm telling you now, he's the Prince of Pot. Better believe me when I say, no shy he's not, he gives it all he's got. He's the Prince of Pot. He's the Prince of Pot.
You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. The only broadcasting network dedicated to ending the global war on drugs on iHeartRadio.